Should we fade injured players? On today's show, we are going to discuss the ADP Injury Index powered by our new partner at SportsMedAnalytics. Before we dive into all that, we want to talk a little bit about following us at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. Make sure you're also checking us out on Razzball.com. We have great new articles. And of course, make sure you're checking out the latest ADP tool. I'm telling you right now, the ADP tool is fantastic. If you're drafting, we have 6 sites across the board. So make sure you're jumping over to Razzball.com. We have baseball in full tilt. We have hockey, and we also have basketball. And of course, we have articles dropping every day on Razzball.com on the football side as well. So before let's introduce our host today. Today's episode is going to be strictly about injuries. We're going to talk about whether you should be buying players at their current ADP. We have 5 sells based on our ADP Injury Index. And we're going to bring in our guests starting right now in the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. Welcome in, Deepak Chona. You can find him on Twitter at SportsMedAnalytics. What's going on, Deepak?
Not too much, man. Just getting ready for football. How are you?
It's been a long time coming. Back in June, I reached out to this young man. I said, you know what, man, I need an injury guy. I have this crazy idea. Deepak heard my idea. He's like, I can do that, man. And after 6 weeks or so of just hard work, it's finally ready. And we're going to talk about some of the players featured in that ADP Injury Index. So I'm excited to have you on, man. So first off, before we even start getting into these players, talk a little bit about your process when it comes to injury analysis and maybe some general background about yourself.
Sure, totally. Well, my background is in orthopedic sports medicine. I'm currently doing fellowship over at Harvard and previously finished residency at Stanford last year. So that's when we met. I was still out in California. And we are, at this point, have been doing this for a couple years, but been thinking about it for many more. So we take kind of a big data and machine learning approach, combining that with some clinical experience and figure out when are these players going to come back, but also importantly, how are they going to be when they come back, and are they going to have durability issues? And that's really the offseason question is can we trust these players who we're investing in, sometimes financially, sometimes emotionally? And I'm pumped to get this thing going.
Yeah, so the Injury Index is now featured on Razzball.com. You can actually find a link in the description when on the show. So also make sure we have 30 players listed here. Some are buys, some are sells, but these are picks. These are buy sells based on their ADP. So if a player falls by 2 rounds or goes up 2 rounds, we might have different buy or sells. So just keep working with us throughout the August into draft season, because Deepak and Razzball.com is going to have that injury index updated for you, so you know when to pull the trigger on these players coming off major injury. Now, today I have Deepak on because I want him to talk about some of the ADP sells. Now, if you go to the article, he does a great job laying out not only the buy sells, but I actually have links to other articles. We have information about why he's fading these players. But these are 5 guys that Deepak kind of left in the dark a little. So I brought him on the show today to talk a little bit about some of these guys. And the first one is Leonard Fournette. Might be a surprise to some people. ADP 23rd overall, according to Razzball.com. So Deepak, tell the people why you're selling Leonard Fournette.
Yeah, Leonard Fournette, he's never played a full season. The most he's ever hit was 15 games in a season, and his highest rushing attempts was around 260 3 years ago and 5 years ago. So with that all in mind, this man has taken a lot of hits, but again, has shown himself to not be the most durable of running backs out there. The other thing to take note on Leonard Fournette is that he has had some recurrent hamstring issues specifically. So these injuries where they're contact injuries, you have a weird fall, sprain a shoulder, or something like that, they don't really show a pattern of recurrence. But a recurrent hamstring is something that it may be something imbalanced in his kinetic chain. We don't really know, but there's a tendency for those to recur. So ultimately, I got to fade Leonard Fournette. I do love the fit. I love the player, but I don't love his prospects of staying healthy the entire year.
Yeah, last year, man. Well, we kind of saw it last year, right? He was dominant when he played, was like a top 5 running back on a points per game basis, and then he got banged up. So I get the thought, but I'm having a hard time fading him at the 2-3 turn. But now that you said sell, I'm starting to think about it twice. Let's jump into the next player, J.K. Dobbins. Now, this guy's coming off a major injury, missed the whole last season. Currently ADP 53rd overall. I think he's a very polarizing prospect, but you're calling him a sell. Or my apologies, buy with caution. That's the only player that's buy with caution, right? So talk to us a little bit about J.K. Dobbins, why he's a buy at his current ADP, but with caution, and explain maybe what that means.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the buy with caution means that you got to keep monitoring his status for any updates. So the thing about J.K. Dobbins is that we are used to seeing ACL tears, but his also involved another ligament on the outside of the knee. And those, for a fantasy perspective, they're more severe, of course. So they take longer, on average, 5 months longer to come back from. And the performance hit on the first year back is usually a little higher. What works in Dobbins' favor is young age, high draft stock, pre-injury efficiency, meaning that he was very high yards per carry, so didn't need a ton of touches to produce. And then lastly, his athleticism pre-injury. So we look for him. We can't really cite his combine stats because he didn't run, but we look back to his high school days when he was coming out. He was the top rated running back in the country for his spark score or athleticism, basically. So all of those combined, we say he has, our algorithm predicts a 75% chance of playing week 1, and he's indicated that he plans to. So that does seem to be favorable. The caution part is maybe a little bit more relaxed from that standpoint. And then in terms of performance, we look at him as 85% of his pre-injury self to start off the season, which is still pretty good player, especially at 53rd overall. So the injury uncertainty is leading people to fade him, I think, a little bit more commonly, but we're mostly buying at that price.
So while we're on the topic, let's talk a little bit about his counterpart, Gus Edwards. I know I didn't prep you. I know I didn't bring this up, but Gus Edwards is actually not even being drafted right now. Is there any thoughts about Gus Edwards, where you might feel comfortable drafting him in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, Gus Edwards is certainly worth a flyer in the late rounds. And the reason being that, one, running backs who have an injury history like J.K. Dobbins are going to be the only guy really in front of him on this team. And two, Gus Edwards had an ACL a little bit after Dobbins, but not much. So you look at an ACL as normally about a 10 to 12 month timeline for recovery, for return. And Gus Edwards is coming around that time. By the time week 1 rolls around, he'll be around 11 to 12 months, I believe. So Gus Edwards has a very high chance of returning at some point in the season, even though he's starting on the PUP. So I think if you're taking a late round flyer, and especially if you have an IR spot and you want to be a little sneaky, use Gus Edwards, your last draft pick, put him on your IR, and then go get your kicker later.
Okay, that's smart. Well, the one thing I will say that worries me just a little bit is even after Mark Ingram left just a couple years ago, they split work kind of 50-50 almost. And that's what kind of capped J.K. Dobbins' upside a little bit. So if Gus Edwards is actually slower to return, we might get that better points per game start from a guy like J.K. Dobbins because he won't be sharing the workload so much with Gus Edwards. Let's jump down to Robert Woods. Let's talk about some seasoned veteran at ADP 109. You know, he's coming off an injury, obviously a serious ACL, I believe, and right around mid-season, correct? So I think at this point, Robert Woods, so outside the top 100, a guy who's a proven top 24 wide receiver, you still have him as a sell. So talk to us about why you're selling Robert Woods.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things to factor in. One, he was a top 25 wide receiver on the Rams system with Sean McVay. And then he's, of course, now in a run-heavy system with Ryan Tannehill. So that is one factor. But then regarding the injury, he tore his ACL in November. And if you look at the 10 to 11 month average for a wide receiver to come back, he could very well be back week 1 or mid-September. But to say that he would be a guy who would beat the odds of having that setback initially post ACL, which is what we commonly see in the NFL for wide receivers, is not to say he would not have that is kind of going out on a limb without data to support it. And the reason I say that is because his athletic percentiles are around 40th for his position. His age is 30. And again, he's getting a big downgrade in system. So with all those three factored in, we can't imagine Robert Woods coming back and being a world beater straight from the start. Again, you're taking guys at that lower ADP that you're looking at as possibly popping for the year and being starters, essentially lottery picks to some degree. So if you want to take a chance on Robert Woods, I don't think it's unreasonable, but I would rather go with a younger guy or someone who has a little bit more upside. But I think Robert Woods is going to be a little bit capped by his lack of explosiveness to start off the year.
All right. Listen, the next guy is another one of these veteran guys that actually got hurt. And Michael Gallup is like, I think it was like one of the last games of the year. In ADP 135, doesn't seem like a high draft cost, but you still have him as a sell. Talk to us a little bit about this because Amari Cooper's gone. James Washington's banged up now. Do you still feel like Gallup is going to be a fade?
Yeah, for me, he is. And the reason is, again, availability. He's not going to be out there to start the season. He may not even be out there the first really half of the season. And if you look at when he had his surgery, it was around February. It's about as late as you can, other than OBJ. I think he was the latest. So you're looking at a guy who's probably going to return. Projected average would be around November. So even if he pushes that a little early to October, it means usually that he'll be less of a percentage of himself. So his explosiveness will be decreased compared to what we have been used to seeing out of Michael Gallup. He may still have productive games here and there, but I don't think it's going to be consistent. And I think it's not because of the talent. I think it's just a limitation of biology. You can't recover all of that explosiveness after this injury in just 9 months.
Okay. Now, for the fall, like let's say dynasty reasons, I'm thinking in my head long term. You're thinking next season, 2023, he's going to be all right. Maybe he's like a buy low in dynasty and then use him for the following year. Is that something you would be considering?
Absolutely. You nailed it really. So the thing with ACLs, especially he's a 26-year-old wide receiver, and a guy in that age range usually has a bounce back year the following year. So if you want to buy low on him now, that's a very reasonable thing to do and really the smart thing to do. And, there's other guys out there right now who are in year 2 post ACL, guys like Saquon, guys like Cortland Sutton. Those are guys you want as buy low this year in redraft. So you're looking 1 year ahead, but that's what I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Bobby.
No, I'm thinking in my mind, if you're a team that isn't ready to win now in your dynasty league, go try to get these guys, scoop them up on the cheap, send them a player that can help maybe a better team win now. Just a thought. But that's enough dynasty talk. Anyway, jumping down to Julio Jones. Talk about dynasty. I mean, this guy has been a dynasty in himself for the last decade, as dominant as he's been. Now he's on the Tampa Bay Bucks. ADP 145th overall right now, according to Razzball ADP. He's up 30 spots from last week alone. Now, Deepak, you still have him as a sell, and he is flashing a little bit in camp. So talk to us a little about Julio and why he's still a sell in your opinion.
So Julio, it's hard to characterize exactly what I meant by the buy or sell alone. Julio for me is actually somebody I am targeting in drafts, but I'm doing so with the expectation that he's not going to be there the whole season. And the reason is, again, like Leonard Fournette, you look at Julio's injury history, it's extensive, of course, but beyond that specifically, he's had at least 4 hamstring strains that caused him to miss time, including each of the last 2 years, he missed pretty significant time with hamstrings. So it tells me that, maybe he's been able to rework his training regimen and work out whatever muscle imbalance is causing this to be a recurrent issue. But also, the more of these you have, the more scar tissue there is in the muscle and the more likely they are to get strained later on. So with all of that, I expect Julio to ball out when he's healthy, and I think he'll be fully healthy to start the season. And it's a valuable thing to have as a wide receiver who is going to be a fixture in your lineup early on while you're figuring out your waiver wires and running back committees and whatnot. So I'm taking him, but I'm taking him with the expectation that he's not going to be there for me the whole year.
Crazy thought. Would you take him as maybe like a Chris Godwin handcuff? And while Chris Godwin gets, acclimated early on in the season, you can start Julio. And then by the time Julio gets hurt, Godwin should be back up and running. Is that like a viable option?
I think that's pretty good. I haven't heard that. The wide receiver handcuff is a unique approach. Obviously you hear that for running backs all the time, but I can't say that the logic is nothing. The logic is excellent. So I might like do that. Yeah.
Yeah, not a bad idea. All right. Well, first of all, that's it. That's what we got for today. The ADP injury index. That's just 5 guys. We have 30 players outlined in the ADP injury index over on Razzball.com. Before we go, Deepak, why don't you tell the people a little bit about where they can find your content outside of the injury index online?
Sure. So thanks for, the plug. Regarding our injury content, we have sportsmedanalytics.com as kind of our home base, but then our social media, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube is pretty active as well. You can find us on any of those, and then wherever you find your podcast, just search up Sports Meta Analytics, and we'll be on Razzball, we'll be on Fantasy Pros, we'll be hopefully all over the internet soon enough. So you let us know if there's players you need to hear about, and we will make it happen.
Oh, trust me, Deepak. We're just getting started, buddy. We're going to be talking about this all August. We're going to make sure everybody's informed anytime an injury. There's going to be injuries in training camp, preseason games. And I might have you on speed dial. You're already up to 3 at this point. You might be passing mom in no time if you keep up the good work. We love it. All right, man. Well, first off, once again, thanks for joining again on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. You can make sure you follow us on there, but also follow us on TikTok and IG at Razzball Fantasy. And of course, make sure you go to Razzball.com for all our great articles on the football, basketball, baseball, and hockey. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. You can find me at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter. That man's Deepak Chona. You can follow him at SportsMedAnalytics on Twitter and all across the board, apparently. Thanks again for joining. We are out of here.